The call came in at 2:17 a.m., a jagged tear in the fabric of a sleeping city. The 911 dispatcher on the other end heard three things in rapid succession: the hiss of an open line, a strangled gasp for air, and a voice, thin and reedy with terror, whispering a fragmented epitaph. She knows Rebecca. She knows everything. Then, a wet, percussive thud, followed by the deafening finality of silence. For Detective David Harding of the Chicago PD, this was how the ghosts were born. They didn't appear in hallways or rattle chains. They materialized as static on a recorded line, their last words becoming the first chapter of a story he was conscripted to finish. As his unmarked sedan cut through the rain-slicked streets of Chicago's South Side, the relentless drizzle felt like a city weeping for itself. The wind whipping off Lake Michigan was a cold, indifferent predator, rattling the skeletons of fire escapes and pushing garbage in lazy swirls across the asphalt. This was Harding's parish, a sprawling landscape of brick bungalows and low-rise apartment buildings where hope and despair lived as next-door neighbors who rarely spoke. The crime scene was a second-floor apartment in a building that had given up decades ago. The air inside was a suffocating cocktail of stale cigarette smoke, fried food, and the coppery, unmistakable stench of blood. The victim, identified by a wallet on the kitchen counter, was Marcus Mark Washington, age 35. He'd been out of Stateville Correctional Center for exactly 1 week. Welcome home. Mark lay sprawled on the worn linoleum, a constellation of vicious stab wounds painting his chest and abdomen a grotesque crimson. The attack was frenzied, personal. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was an exorcism. The room was a tableau of chaos, an overturned table, shattered glass from a whiskey bottle. But beneath the rage, there was something else. A strange, meticulous detail that snagged at the edge of Harding's perception. Smears on the floor showed where someone had tried to wipe away the blood with a dish towel, a clumsy, panicked attempt at erasure that only succeeded in spreading the evidence. An amateur's cleanup. Harding, a man whose weary eyes had cataloged more of the city's sins than most priests, moved through the space with a practiced, almost reverent calm. He was a product of this side of town, his presence a quiet testament to the fact that you could be from the struggle without being defined by it. His colleagues, mostly white cops who commuted in from the suburbs, saw the South Side as a war zone. Harding saw it as a complex ecosystem of survivors, hustlers, and saints, and he knew that violence here was rarely simple. It was a language, and his job was to translate. His gaze swept the room, cataloging the poverty and the pride. An old TV perched on a milk crate, a hot plate instead of a stove. But on the wall, a single professionally framed photograph. It was a wedding picture. Mark, younger and smiling, his arm wrapped around a beautiful woman. They stood in front of the Buckingham Fountain, frozen in a moment of boundless optimism. Harding stepped closer, his breath catching in his throat. The glass of the frame was spiderwebbed with cracks, a single point of impact at its center. But that wasn't the detail that made the hair on his arm stand up. That wasn't the mini hook that snagged his professional curiosity and twisted it into something deeply unsettling. Someone had taken the time, amidst the carnage and the panicked cleanup, to perform a final deliberate act of desecration. They had carefully, precisely used a shard of glass to cut the bride's face out of the photograph. It wasn't a jagged tear of rage. It was a surgical excision, a void where a smile should have been. It was an act that spoke not just of anger, but of a profound, chilling desire to erase a person from the narrative, to declare that she was no longer part of the story. "Who's the wife?" Harding asked, his voice a low rumble that cut through the sterile procedural chatter of the forensics team. A patrol officer flipped through his notepad. "Rebecca Washington. They divorced 3 days ago, just 4 days after he got out." Harding stared at the empty space in the photograph. A 7-year prison sentence. A wife who waits. A release. A divorce. A murder. The timeline was compressed, impossibly tight, charged with a volatile energy that had finally detonated in this small, suffocating room. The victim's last words echoed in his mind. She knows. Rebecca. She knows everything. Was it a warning or an accusation? Was he trying to name his killer, or was he speaking of a different, more terrible truth that had sealed his fate? Harding knew one thing for certain as he stood in the wreckage of Mark Washington's 10-day-old freedom. The ghost on the 911 call had given him the first clue, and it pointed directly to the woman with the missing face. The interview room was a sterile, beige box designed to strip away comfort and pretense. It smelled of weak coffee and institutional disinfectant. Rebecca Washington sat at the small metal table, a portrait of shattered grief. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, her hands trembling as she clutched a crumpled tissue. She looked smaller than in the wedding photograph, as if the weight of the last 24 hours had physically compressed her. Beside her, a constant anchoring presence, was her best friend, Layla Vance. Layla was the polar opposite of Rebecca's fragile state. Where Rebecca seemed to be dissolving, Layla was a pillar of righteous fury. Her posture was ramrod straight, her eyes sharp and angry, darting from Harding to her friend with fierce protectiveness. She had her arm wrapped around Rebecca's shoulders, a gesture that seemed less like comfort and more like reinforcement. "She waited 7 years for him," Layla began before Harding could even ask his first question, her voice dripping with contempt. 7 years of her life, thrown away. And for what? For him to come home and... She trailed off, shaking her head as she rubbed Rebecca's back. "She doesn't deserve this." Harding let the statement hang in the air, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Washington," he said, his voice gentle but firm, addressing Rebecca directly. "I know this is incredibly difficult, but the timeline is unusual. You waited all that time. He gets out, and just 3 days later, you file for divorce. Can you tell me what happened?" Rebecca flinched, a fresh wave of tears welling up. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a choked sob escaped. Layla squeezed her shoulder. "It was the lies," Layla said, her gaze locking with Harding's, a silent challenge. "He wasn't the same man who went in." "People change in prison," Harding stated, his eyes still fixed on Rebecca. "I need to hear it from you, ma'am." Rebecca took a shuddering breath, her voice barely a whisper. He wrote me every week, for 7 years, letters filled with plans, a house, kids, our future. I held onto those letters like they were gospel." She looked up, and for the first time, Harding saw something flicker beneath the grief, a deep, corrosive anger. It was all a lie, the whole thing. She explained that on his first night home, the reunion she had dreamed of for 2,555 days turned into a nightmare of excuses and avoidance. The second night was the same. Finally, cornered and desperate, Mark confessed the truth. A terrible accident had happened in prison. An attack. He had been brutally mutilated, his manhood stolen from him by a prison gang. The doctors had patched him up, but he was, in her words, broken. "It wasn't even the injury," Rebecca insisted, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. Maybe I could have dealt with that. It was the deception. He knew for years, and he let me go on believing, planning a family he knew we could never have. How do you stay with a man who could build a future on such a rotten foundation? It was a compelling motive for divorce, a devastating betrayal. But for murder? Harding watched them closely. Layla nodded along with every word Rebecca said, her expression a mask of supportive indignation. She would occasionally lean in and whisper something in Rebecca's ear, too quiet for Harding to hear. After one such whisper, Rebecca added, "I have an alibi, detective. The night it happened, Layla was with me. I left my bartending job, and she took me to her place. We watched old movies until sunrise. I couldn't be alone." "We'll verify that," Harding said smoothly. He saw how Layla's hand tightened on Rebecca's, a brief, almost imperceptible clench of her fingers. It was the smallest of tells, a flicker of control in a sea of performative grief. He had seen this before. Witnesses and suspects coached by loved ones, lawyers, or sometimes by the guilt-ridden partners who had more to hide than the person being questioned. Layla's presence felt directorial. She wasn't just supporting her grieving friend. She seemed to be stage-managing the entire scene, ensuring Rebecca hit her marks and delivered her lines perfectly. Harding shifted his focus. "Ms. Vance, you and Rebecca are close?" "We're sisters," Layla answered immediately. "I've been by her side through this whole nightmare. When Mark went away, I was the one who picked up the pieces. I was the one who held her while she cried over his letters. Letters from a liar." The venom in her voice when she said Mark's name was far more potent than Rebecca's sorrowful anger. It was pure, unadulterated hatred. "So, you knew him well?" "I knew of him," Layla corrected sharply. "I knew the pain he caused. That's all I needed to know." Harding made a note. The dynamics in the room were all wrong. Rebecca's grief felt real, but it was unfocused, drowned out by the louder, more forceful emotions radiating from her friend. Layla was the one driving the narrative, framing Mark as a monster who got what he deserved, and Rebecca as the blameless victim. It was too neat, too black and white. Murder, like life, was almost always a messy, complicated shade of gray. As the interview concluded, Harding stood and offered Rebecca a generic condolence. She nodded numbly, allowing Layla to help her to her feet. As they turned to leave, Harding noticed it. A small, intimate gesture that sent a jolt of suspicion through him. Layla, believing they were no longer being watched, leaned in close to Rebecca's ear. Her lips moved in a silent whisper, and then she gently, almost unconsciously, used her thumb to wipe a tear from Rebecca's cheek. It wasn't the gesture itself that was strange, but the expression on Layla's face. It wasn't sympathy. It was a look of intense proprietary focus, the kind a sculptor might give her clay, ensuring the final creation was flawless. She wasn't just comforting a friend, she was polishing a performance. And Harding was suddenly certain that the real story wasn't about a grieving widow, but about the woman standing guard over her. Stateville Correctional Center rises from the flat Illinois plains like a concrete fortress, a monument to bad decisions and lost time. The air inside is thick with the smells of boiled cabbage, sweat, and a low-grade, simmering despair. For Detective Harding, walking its polished corridors was like visiting a different country, one with its own language, customs, and a strict code of silence that made getting a straight answer nearly impossible. His Chicago PD badge, a symbol of authority on the outside, meant little here. In Stateville, the only currency that mattered was respect, fear, and information, and the latter was never given for free. Harding was looking for a ghost, the man Mark Washington was for 7 years. His file was a roadmap of his time inside, a few minor infractions in the beginning, followed by a long stretch of good behavior. But files were paper. They didn't have voices, and they didn't tell you about the whispers in the chow hall or the politics of the yard. Harding's investigation had confirmed the basics of Rebecca's story. Mark had witnessed a shanking in the showers, a hit carried out by a member of the Aryan Serpents, a notoriously violent white supremacist gang. He testified, and in the unspoken laws of prison, he signed his own death warrant. The official report called the subsequent attack on him in the laundry room an inmate altercation. It detailed his injuries in sterile medical terms, but omitted the savage message they were intended to send. To get the real story, Harding needed to talk to someone who had breathed the same recycled air as Mark. That led him to a man known only as Smokey, Mark's cellmate for the last 4 years, who had been paroled a month before Mark. Harding found him working at a tire shop in Englewood, his parole officer having provided the address with a weary sigh. Smokey was a wiry man in his late 50s, his skin a roadmap of old scars and prison tattoos. When Harding identified himself and mentioned Mark's name, a curtain of fear immediately fell over Smokey's face. His eyes darted around the greasy workshop, as if the ghosts of Stateville might be lurking behind a stack of radials. "Man, I don't know nothing about that," Smokey said, his voice low and raspy. He wiped his hands on an already filthy rag, refusing to make eye contact. "Mark and me, we kept to ourselves, did our time. That's it." "He was murdered, Smokey," Harding said, his tone even. "Stabbed to death in his apartment. Someone wanted to finish the job they started inside." The mention of the stabbing made Smokey flinch. "Look, detective, you don't understand. The serpents, they got long memories, and they got eyes and ears everywhere. On the inside, on the outside. Talking about them is like praying for a bad death." Harding leaned against a workbench, projecting an air of patience he didn't feel. "I'm not asking you to testify in court. I'm not putting your name in a report. I just need to understand what happened to him. The official story is one thing. You and I both know the truth is another." He slid a fresh $20 bill onto the bench. "For your time." Smokey stared at the bill, then at Harding's face, his mind clearly weighing the risks. Finally, he let out a long, shaky breath. "He was a fool," Smokey whispered, his voice cracking. A naive fool. Thought doing the right thing would get him protection from the COs. All it got him was a target on his back. He described the attack in visceral, horrifying detail. It wasn't just a beating. It was a ritualistic unmaking designed to strip Mark of his identity as a man. When they were done, he wasn't Mark no more. He was just a reminder, a walking message to anyone else who thought about ratting. Smokey said that after Mark got out of the infirmary, he became a recluse, a shadow of his former self. He stopped going to the yard, ate his meals quickly, and spoke to no one. Except, that is, when he was writing his letters to Rebecca. He'd write for hours, Smokey recalled, pouring his heart out on that cheap paper, all sunshine and rainbows. Never mentioned a word of what really happened. Said he couldn't break her heart like that. Harding nodded. This all tracked with what Rebecca had said. But he felt there was something more, a piece of the puzzle still hidden. Was there anyone else? Anyone on the outside he talked to? Smokey hesitated, his eyes clouding over. That's the strange part, he said, lowering his voice even further. After the attack, she started showing up. She? Harding prompted, leaning in. His cousin, Smokey said, making air quotes with his greasy fingers. Showed up once a month, regular as clockwork. Pretty thing, dressed nice, always looked out of place in the visitation room. What was her name? Called herself Sheila Jones on the visitor logs. But we all knew it was a fake name. No one in Mark's family was named Sheila. Smokey shook his head, a look of grudging admiration on his face. Man, she was his lifeline. Brought him money for his commissary, messages, whatever he needed. She was like his own personal, his guardian angel. This was it. The loose thread. A secret visitor, an alias, a relationship hidden from everyone, especially the wife who was faithfully waiting on the outside. This guardian angel was a variable that didn't fit into the neat narrative of a man betrayed by his wife. What did she look like? Harding asked, his mind racing. Light-skinned, short hair, always wore these big flashy earrings, Smokey described. Looked kind of familiar, but I could never place her. Harding felt a chill snake down his spine. The description was vague, but it could have matched 100,000 women in Chicago. Still, the existence of this woman changed everything. She was the secret keeper, the one who knew the truth of Mark's life inside when his own wife was being fed a fantasy. Who was she? And what did she want from Mark once he was free? As Harding prepared to leave, Smokey grabbed his arm, his eyes wide with a sudden urgent fear. "Detective, listen to me," he whispered intensely. "Forget the serpents. They already got their pound of flesh. They made their point. Whatever happened to Mark on the outside, it wasn't them. You need to find his angel. They say the devil was an angel once, right? Well, sometimes the angels are the ones you gotta watch out for." Back at the precinct, the air was stale with the smell of burnt coffee and bureaucratic apathy. Harding's captain, a man named Miller with a gut that strained the buttons of his white shirt and a worldview that stopped at the city limits, was already losing patience. Miller was a company man, a creature of statistics and easy answers. He saw a black victim with a prison record, killed on the South Side, and his mind immediately jumped to the most convenient conclusion. "It's gang-related, Harding," Miller declared, leaning back in his creaky office chair. He gestured dismissively at the preliminary report on his desk. Ex-con, beef with the Aryan Serpents. One of their associates probably got out and decided to finish the job. Wrap it up, put it down as gang retaliation, and let's move on. We've got bigger fish to fry. Harding stood his ground, his jaw tight. "With all due respect, Captain, that doesn't fit. The scene was personal. The cleanup attempt, the photograph. This wasn't a professional hit. This was passion. This was rage." Miller sighed, the sound of a man burdened by an underling who insisted on complicating things. "Passion? These guys kill each other over a pair of sneakers. Don't romanticize it. Mark Washington was a product of his environment. He lived by the sword. He died by the sword. It's the story of this whole damn side of town." The casual dismissal, the paint-by-numbers prejudice, made Harding's blood run cold. It was a narrative he'd fought against his entire career. To men like Miller, people like Mark Washington weren't individuals. They were statistics, their lives and deaths reduced to a predictable, tragic archetype. Harding saw the man. Flawed, certainly, but a man nonetheless. A man who wrote love letters, who had a wife, who once smiled by a fountain, dreaming of a future. His environment didn't hold a knife and stab him 20 times, Captain, Harding said, his voice dangerously quiet. A person did, and I don't think it was a serpent. Fine, Miller grumbled, waving a hand. You've got 48 hours to bring me something better. After that, I'm closing the book on this one, my way. Walking back to his desk, the captain's words echoing in his ears, Harding felt the familiar weight of fighting a war on two fronts. One against the criminals on the streets, and another against the indifference within his own department. He pulled up Mark Washington's juvenile record, the prologue to his life's story. It was a depressingly familiar tale. A father he never knew, a mother working 2 jobs. He was first picked up at 14 for shoplifting, trying to get a pair of Nikes he couldn't afford. At 16, he was arrested for joyriding in a car with older kids. The white kid driving got a slap on the wrist. Mark, sitting in the passenger seat, got 6 months in juvie because the arresting officer wrote in his report that Mark had a hostile and uncooperative attitude. That was the turning point. The system had branded him, decided who he was before he had a chance to figure it out for himself. The bitterness took root. He dropped out of school, fell in with the wrong crowd, and the small-time mistakes escalated until a botched gas station robbery landed him in Stateville. It wasn't an excuse for his choices, Harding knew, but it was a context that men like Miller would never bother to understand. Mark's life was a chain reaction, a series of doors slamming shut until the only one left open led to a prison cell. Harding's determination hardened. He wouldn't let Mark's death become just another statistic, another closed file confirming a captain's cynical worldview. He owed it to the ghost on the 911 call to find the real story, the messy, complicated human truth. His phone rang, jarring him from his thoughts. It was the forensics lab. "Hey, Harding," the tech's voice crackled over the line. "Got something weird for you on the Washington scene." "Go ahead," Harding said, leaning forward. "We ran a full chemical analysis on those wipe marks. The killer used a rag, all right, but it was soaked in something. We found trace amounts of a solvent called Pro-Clean 3000. Harding frowned. "Never heard of it." "You wouldn't have," the tech replied. "It's not a household cleaner. It's an industrial-grade degreaser, the kind of stuff they use in commercial kitchens, auto body shops, places like that. It's designed to break down protein and organic matter, blood, grease, you name it. It's incredibly effective." Harding sat bolt upright. A detail like that was a flag, a huge waving red flag. An ordinary person in a panic would grab Windex or dish soap. They wouldn't have access to an industrial-grade solvent. This suggested a level of premeditation, of knowledge. The killer might have cleaned up like an amateur, but they had come prepared with a professional's tools. "One more thing, Detective," the tech added, his voice dropping. "We swept every inch of that apartment, tore the place apart, checked the pipes, the vents, everywhere. And the murder weapon is gone, vanished. Whoever did this was clumsy enough to leave wipe marks, but smart enough to take the knife with them. It makes no sense." Harding hung up the phone, a cold knot forming in his stomach. The case had just become infinitely more complex. A killer who was both sloppy and meticulous. A rage-fueled attack followed by a calculated disposal of evidence. And a professional cleaning agent that pointed not to a gangbanger, but to someone with specific access. Specific knowledge. The easy answer Captain Miller wanted was dissolving before his eyes, replaced by the silhouette of a much more cunning and deliberate killer. The next 48 hours were a slow, grinding crawl through a desert of dead ends. The Aryan Serpents alibied out. Their leaders, still locked down in Stateville, had no interest in a messy revenge hit on the outside that would bring unwanted heat. The few known associates on the streets were accounted for. Captain Miller's neat and tidy gang theory was officially dead, leaving Harding with a murder that was rapidly growing cold. He had a victim, a motive for divorce, a mysterious guardian angel, and a phantom cleaning agent, but no weapon, no viable suspects, and no clear path forward. The pressure from Miller was mounting, a constant low-grade hum of "I told you so" and "wrap it up." Frustration gnawed at Harding. He felt like he was staring at a locked room, knowing the key was somewhere nearby, but unable to see it. The crime scene had been picked clean by forensics and offered no more secrets. The initial canvass of the neighbors had yielded nothing but drawn blinds and sworn ignorance. It was on the second night, sitting at his desk, staring at the case file until the words blurred together, that an idea sparked. It was a long shot, a move often seen as a last resort when traditional police work failed. He thought about the missing knife. The killer had taken it. Why? To prevent it from being found. They had walked out of that building and into the rainy Chicago night with a bloody knife in their possession. They would have wanted to dispose of it as quickly as possible. He picked up the phone and made a call that he knew would earn him a fresh wave of ridicule from Miller. He called the K-9 unit. The next morning, the air was damp and heavy as Officer Miller, no relation to the captain, a fact both men were quick to point out, arrived at the crime scene with his partner. His partner was Shadow, a magnificent German shepherd whose intelligent dark eyes missed nothing. Shadow wasn't a standard drug or bomb-sniffing dog. He was a cadaver dog, trained to detect the unique scent of human decomposition. But he also had a secondary, highly specialized skill. He was a metal scent dog, conditioned to locate the faint odor of iron oxide, rust, accelerated by contact with blood. He could find a discarded firearm or a knife days after it was dropped. Captain Miller had scoffed at the request. A dog? Harding? This isn't a damn TV show. What's he gonna do, sniff out the bad guy? But Harding had insisted. Now, standing in the cold morning light, watching Officer Miller lead the powerful animal toward the apartment building, he felt a flicker of hope. It was a primal appeal to an older, more honest form of detection. Shadow entered Mark Washington's apartment, his powerful nose twitching, sampling the air. He moved through the space with a quiet, intense focus, a stark contrast to the human chaos that had unfolded there. He sniffed the bloodstains on the floor, the overturned furniture, the empty space where Mark's body had lain. After a thorough circuit of the room, he looked up at Officer Miller and gave a soft whine, a clear signal. The source is gone. What you're looking for isn't here. Disappointment settled in Harding's chest. It had been a long shot. "All right, boy, let's check the perimeter," Officer Miller said, his voice calm and encouraging. He led Shadow out of the apartment and into the hallway, then down the stairs and out the front door. The dog began to work the area in a grid pattern, his nose glued to the ground. He swept the patchy grass in front of the building, the sidewalk, the gutter. Nothing. Harding's shoulders slumped. Time was up. He would have to go back to the captain with empty hands. Then it happened. Shadow, who had been moving with methodical purpose, suddenly froze. His head snapped up, his ears perked, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. He wasn't sniffing the ground anymore. He was scenting the air. He took a few steps, then a few more. His body tensed like a drawn bowstring. He pulled hard on the leash, ignoring Officer Miller's commands to heel. "What is it, boy? What do you got?" Miller murmured, letting the dog lead. Shadow broke into a trot, pulling the officer away from the front of the building and around the side, into the narrow, garbage-strewn alley that ran behind it. The alley was a dark, forgotten space between brick walls, smelling of stale beer and decay. Shadow ignored the overflowing dumpsters, his focus absolute. He went straight to the end of the alley, where a large iron storm drain grate was set into the concrete. He stopped directly over the grate, his low growl intensified into a series of sharp, frantic barks. He pawed at the heavy iron, then looked back at the two men, his eyes alight with the thrill of discovery. It was an unmistakable, explosive alert. "He's got something," Officer Miller said, a note of awe in his voice. "He's got it strong." Harding stared at the storm drain, his heart pounding against his ribs. The alley was the most logical escape route, a path away from the streetlights and potential witnesses. The drain was the perfect hiding place, dark, deep, and easily accessible. The killer, fleeing the scene with a bloody knife, could have simply lifted the grate, dropped the evidence into the rushing rainwater below, and vanished into the night. The contrast was stunning. Hours of human deduction, forensic science, and technological analysis had yielded nothing. But in less than 20 minutes, the primal, incorruptible instincts of an animal had led them here, to a piece of rusted iron set in the concrete. The fading scent of blood on steel, washed by the rain but still clinging to the air for a nose sensitive enough to find it, had provided the last, desperate hope. As the public works crew was called to pry open the heavy grate, Harding knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his gut, that they were about to find the murder weapon. Shadow, the silent witness, had just broken the case wide open. The city workers arrived with a clang of steel tools and a cloud of diesel exhaust, their bright orange vests a stark intrusion on the gray alley. Using a heavy crowbar, they grunted and strained, finally prying the massive iron grate from its concrete housing. A wave of foul, stagnant air washed over them from the dark maw of the storm sewer below. It was a subterranean world, a network of tunnels carrying away the city's unwanted runoff. A technician from the forensics unit, equipped with waders and a powerful flashlight, descended into the churning, murky water. The beam of his light cut through the darkness, illuminating a disgusting slurry of leaves, trash, and silt. For a moment, there was only the sound of his sloshing footsteps and the distant rush of water. Harding held his breath. "Got it," the tech's voice echoed up from the drain. "I think I've got it." He emerged a minute later, holding a clear evidence bag. Inside, covered in grime but unmistakably a weapon, was a standard 8-inch chef's knife. It was the kind you could buy at any department store, cheap and anonymous. But as he held it up to the light, Harding could see faint, dark residue still clinging to the crevice where the blade met the plastic handle. The killer had tried to wipe it clean, and the storm water had done the rest of the work, but blood has a way of clinging to the places you can't see. "Get this to the lab. Rush it," Harding ordered, his voice tight with anticipation. "I want every possible trace analyzed. DNA, prints, anything you can find on the handle, under the hilt, anywhere." This was the breakthrough, a murder weapon, recovered against all odds. Now, the science could do its work. While the lab began the painstaking process of analysis, Harding returned to the precinct and immersed himself in the digital world. He requested the security footage from a small 24-hour convenience store located directly across the street from Mark Washington's apartment building. The camera's angle was poor, partially obscured by a tree, but it offered a glimpse of the sidewalk and the entrance. For hours, Harding sat in the dark, his eyes burning as he scanned the grainy, black and white footage from the night of the murder. He fast-forwarded through hours of rain and passing cars. Then, he saw it. At 11:42 p.m., a figure appeared, walking quickly down the street. The person was wearing a dark hooded sweatshirt, the hood pulled low to obscure their face. Their build was slight, their gait hurried and anxious. They hesitated for a moment before ducking into the entrance of Mark's building. Harding leaned closer to the screen, his mind racing. The figure's height and frame were consistent with that of a woman. 33 minutes later, at 12:15 a.m., the same hooded figure emerged, moving even faster now. They clutched something in their jacket pocket and glanced nervously up and down the street, before hurrying away and disappearing into the darkness of the alley, the same alley where the knife was found. The timeline fit perfectly with the medical examiner's estimated time of death. He had a ghost on video, a faceless suspect. He rewound and replayed the clip a dozen times, trying to find a distinguishing feature, a unique mannerism, anything. But there was nothing. The person was a complete unknown. He spent the rest of the day chasing down the lead on the industrial cleaner, ProClean 3000. He learned it was a specialty product sold primarily to restaurant and janitorial supply companies. He started compiling a list of businesses in the area that used it, a daunting task that felt like searching for a single grain of sand on a vast beach. By late afternoon, he was exhausted, running on caffeine and adrenaline. He was no closer to putting a face to the figure on the tape. He was staring at the screen, the hooded phantom on endless loop, when his desk phone blared, startling him. It was the forensics lab. "You're not going to believe this," said the voice on the other end, buzzing with excitement. "Talk to me," Harding said, sitting up straight. The knife was a mess, mostly washed clean. The DNA on the blade itself was degraded, but it was a clear match to your victim, Mark Washington. No surprise there. But the handle, that's where we got lucky. Harding waited, his knuckles white as he gripped the phone. The killer must have had a very tight grip. We managed to lift a partial latent fingerprint from the underside of the plastic handle. It was protected from the water, smeared but viable. We ran it through AFIS, the Automated Fingerprint Identification System, a database containing the prints of millions of known criminals. And, Harding pressed. "Did you get a hit?" There was a dramatic pause on the other end of the line. "No," the tech said. "We got no hit from the criminal database." Harding's heart sank. A dead end. "But," the tech continued, drawing out the word, "on a hunch, we also ran it against the civilian database. The system that includes prints from government jobs, military service, teaching licenses, concealed carry permits, stuff like that." "And," Harding repeated, his voice barely a whisper, "we got a perfect match, Detective. 100%. The print on the murder weapon belongs to a Ms. Layla Vance. She was fingerprinted 2 years ago for her license to work as a substitute teacher in the Chicago public school system." Harding felt the air leave his lungs in a sudden rush. Layla Vance, the supportive best friend, the righteous, angry woman who had sat in the interview room, coaching the grieving widow, the one whose hatred for Mark had burned hotter than his ex-wife's sorrow. Smokey's words came rushing back to him. "Sometimes the angels are the ones you gotta watch out for." He stared at the grainy image of the hooded figure on his monitor. He still couldn't see a face, but now, with chilling certainty, he knew her name. The name, Layla Vance, reverberated in the silence of the squad room, shifting the entire geometry of the case. She wasn't just a peripheral character anymore. She was the axis around which everything now turned. The supportive friend, the grieving sister in arms, was now the prime suspect in a brutal murder. Harding felt a cold clarity descend upon him. The strange dynamics in the interview room, Layla's directorial presence, her palpable hatred for Mark. It all snapped into sharp, terrifying focus. His first move was to dissect Layla's alibi. Rebecca had claimed they were together all night. Harding pulled the work schedule from the Blue Note Lounge, the jazz bar where both women worked. As Rebecca had stated, she worked until closing at 2 a.m. Layla's schedule, however, had a curious anomaly. According to the shift manager, Layla had clocked out for an unscheduled 1-hour break at 11:30 p.m. The manager, a harried man named Sal, remembered it clearly. "Yeah, she seemed really agitated," he told Harding over the phone. "Said her mom wasn't feeling well, and she had to run to the 24-hour pharmacy to pick up a prescription. Seemed urgent, so I let her go. She was back a little over an hour later." 11:30 p.m. The time fit perfectly. The hooded figure on the security tape had entered Mark's building at 11:42 p.m. The bar was less than a 10-minute drive away. Layla had a window of opportunity, a perfect 1-hour slice of time where she was completely unaccounted for. She could have driven to Mark's apartment, committed the murder, disposed of the knife, and returned to work to create the second half of her alibi, leaving with Rebecca at 2 a.m. as the concerned friend. The pieces were falling into place with sickening speed. Harding's next call was to the Illinois Department of Corrections, requesting the full, unredacted visitor logs for Mark Washington during his 7 years at Stateville. He specifically asked them to cross-reference the name Layla Vance and the alias provided by Smokey, Sheila Jones. He didn't have to wait long. An hour later, a faxed document spooled out of the machine at the precinct. Harding stared at it, his jaw tightening. It was all there in black and white. Layla Vance had no official visits logged, but Sheila Jones, Mark's supposed cousin, had visited him 84 times over 7 years. Once a month, almost without fail. The guardian angel Smokey had described, the one who brought him money and support, the one who knew the truth about his mutilation when his wife didn't, it was Layla. The deception was staggering in its depth and duration. For 7 years, Layla had lived a double life. To Rebecca, she was the loyal best friend, the shoulder to cry on, sharing in her friend's pain and loneliness. But, in secret, she was maintaining a deep, intimate connection with the very man who was the source of that pain. Was she spying for Mark? Was it a twisted obsession? Or was it something else entirely? Harding felt a surge of anger, not just at the killer, but at the sheer cold-blooded cruelty of the manipulation. Layla hadn't just comforted Rebecca. She had actively participated in a lie that hollowed out 7 years of her best friend's life. He needed more. He needed to know where this all began. This level of devotion and deceit didn't just spring from nowhere. He assigned a junior detective to run a deep background check on Layla Vance, to dig into her life before Mark went to prison. He wanted to know everything, old addresses, jobs, relationships. While he waited, he thought about Smokey's vague recollection of Layla's face. Looked kind of familiar, but I could never place her. Of course, she looked familiar. She was the best friend of his cellmate's wife, a face he had likely seen in photos Mark kept in his cell. Late that afternoon, the junior detective returned, a single sheet of paper in his hand and a look of discovery on his face. "You're not going to believe this, detective," he said, handing the paper to Harding. "I was digging through old CPD incident reports, just searching for any connection between Mark Washington and Layla Vance. And I found one." Harding took the sheet. It was a police report from 8 years ago, a few months before Mark's armed robbery conviction. The report detailed a minor bar fight. The subject of the report, arrested for assault, was Marcus Washington. According to the statement from the victim, a man who had suffered a broken nose, Mark had attacked him without provocation after he tried to flirt with Mark's girlfriend. Harding read the next line, and the final, crucial piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The report listed the name of the girlfriend who was present at the scene, the woman Mark had been defending so violently. Her name was Layla Vance. She wasn't just a secret prison visitor. She wasn't just a manipulative best friend. She was his ex-girlfriend, the woman he was with before he met Rebecca. This entire tangled web of lies and betrayal hadn't started when Mark went to prison. It had started years earlier. Layla hadn't inserted herself into Rebecca's life to get close to Mark. Mark had entered Rebecca's life while he was still, in some way, entangled with Layla. The betrayal ran deeper than Harding could have possibly imagined, a toxic root system that had finally borne its murderous fruit. The Blue Note Lounge was quiet in the late afternoon, the air thick with the ghosts of last night's music and spilled whiskey. Rebecca Washington was behind the bar, polishing glasses with a slow, mechanical motion, her eyes distant and unfocused. She looked like a woman running on fumes, caught in the surreal aftermath of a life that had been detonated. When she saw Detective Harding walk in, a flicker of fear crossed her face. "Detective," she said, her voice hoarse, "did you find out who did it?" Harding sat down on a bar stool, his expression somber. There was no easy way to do this. He was about to take the fractured remnants of her world and grind them into dust. "We have, Mrs. Washington," he said gently. "But before we get to that, I need to ask you some more questions. About Layla." Rebecca frowned, a line of confusion creasing her brow. "Layla? What does she have to do with this? She's been my rock through everything." How long have you known her?" "About 8 years," Rebecca replied. "We met here at the bar. She trained me when I first started. We just clicked. She was the first person I told when Mark and I started getting serious. She was my maid of honor." The words hung in the air, heavy with a tragic irony that Rebecca couldn't yet comprehend. Harding took a deep breath. "Rebecca, were you aware that Layla and Mark were in a relationship before you met him?" The question struck her like a physical blow. She froze, the glass in her hand slipping from her grasp and clattering onto the rubber mat. "What? No, that's impossible. They barely knew each other. He would come in sometimes to pick me up. They'd say hello. That was it. She would have told me. We tell each other everything." "I'm afraid it's true," Harding said, his voice laced with pity. He laid out the evidence piece by piece. The 8-year-old police report naming Layla as Mark's girlfriend. The 84 visits to Stateville under a fake name. The phone records showing constant contact. He watched as Rebecca's face cycled through a storm of emotions. Disbelief, confusion, denial, and finally, a dawning, sickening comprehension. The color drained from her face. She sank onto a nearby stool, her legs giving out from under her. "No," she whispered, shaking her head as if to ward off the truth. "No, it can't be." She looked at Harding, her eyes pleading. "All those years, she sat with me. She read his letters with me. She held me when I cried because I missed him. It was all a lie?" "It appears so," Harding confirmed softly. "We believe she knew about his injury from the beginning. She was playing a very long game, Rebecca." The realization finally broke through her denial, and it was replaced by a tidal wave of fury and betrayal. The grief for her dead ex-husband was vaporized, consumed by the white-hot rage of this new, more profound wound. "That snake," she hissed, her voice trembling. "She was the one. She was the one who pushed me to divorce him. Harding leaned forward. What do you mean? When I found out about his injury and the lies, I was a mess, Rebecca recounted, her words coming in a rush. I didn't know what to do. I still loved him, or I thought I did. But Layla, she was relentless. She kept telling me he didn't deserve me, that a man who could lie like that was a monster. She said, "You need to cut him loose, Becky, for your own good. A liar like that doesn't deserve you." Rebecca let out a bitter, humorless laugh. She wasn't trying to protect me. She was clearing the way for herself. The final piece of the motive clicked into place. Layla had orchestrated the divorce, manipulating her best friend's pain to get what she wanted. Mark free and clear. But something had gone wrong. Mark had rejected her, and her 7-year investment of lies and devotion had yielded nothing. The resulting rage had been fatal. Rebecca buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. The tears weren't for Mark anymore. They were for her stolen years, for a friendship that had been a monstrous lie, for her own blindness. After a long moment, she looked up, her eyes blazing with a new, terrible clarity. She suddenly pushed herself off the stool, her expression one of dawning horror, as if a final, repressed memory had just broken through to the surface. "Oh, God," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "The letters." "What about the letters?" Harding asked, a sense of dread creeping over him. "After the divorce," Rebecca said, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "Layla convinced me I needed a clean break, a fresh start. She said I had to get rid of everything that tied me to him, to purge the poison. All his pictures, his gifts, and all his letters from prison. 7 years of letters." She stared at Harding, her eyes wide with the chilling realization. "I couldn't bring myself to do it. It felt wrong, like throwing away a part of my life. But she insisted. She said it was for the best. She told me, 'Don't worry, Becky. I'll take care of it for you. I'll burn them myself so you don't have to.' And like a fool, I let her. I packed them all in a box and gave them to her." Harding felt a pit in his stomach. Layla hadn't just manipulated Rebecca into a divorce. She had systematically, deliberately, erased the evidence of the fantasy Mark had sold to his wife. The fantasy Layla knew was a lie all along. She wasn't just clearing the path to her future, she was burying the past. The moment Rebecca's story about the letters confirmed Layla's calculated deception, the investigation shifted from a quiet accumulation of evidence to a high-stakes manhunt. A bolo, be on the lookout, for Layla Vance and her gray Honda Civic was issued across the state of Illinois. Harding knew they were racing against a suspect who was not only a murderer, but also a cunning and patient manipulator. A woman who could maintain a lie for 7 years would not be caught easily. But Layla made her first mistake. In her haste to flee, she had taken her credit cards. In the modern world, it was the equivalent of leaving a trail of digital breadcrumbs. The first ping came from a gas station in Joliet, just southwest of Chicago. She had filled up her tank and bought a coffee and a bag of chips. She was on the move. An hour later, another alert. A small purchase at a pharmacy in Bloomington. Harding and his team tracked her progress on a digital map, a flashing red dot moving steadily southward along the artery of Interstate 55. She was running, heading for the anonymity of the open road. "She's not a hardened criminal," Harding said to his team, gathered around the dispatch monitor. "She's driven by emotion. She's panicking. She'll make more mistakes." The hours dragged on as they followed the electronic trail. A stop at a fast food joint in Springfield. Another gas top-off just across the state line in Missouri. She was moving fast, putting as much distance as possible between herself and Chicago. Harding coordinated with the Illinois State Police, then with the Missouri Highway Patrol, feeding them Layla's license plate number and description. Patrol cars were stationed at choke points along I-55, waiting, but Layla was lucky. She slipped through the net each time, her unassuming Honda Civic just one of thousands of cars hurtling down the highway. As night fell, the pings stopped. Layla had likely switched to cash, realizing her cards were a liability. The trail went cold. Frustration mounted in the incident room. They had lost her. She could be heading anywhere now, west to Kansas City, south to Arkansas, or further toward the border. Harding refused to give up. He instructed his team to get an emergency warrant for a wiretap on Layla's mother's phone. She's running on pure emotion, Harding theorized, pacing in front of the map. She feels betrayed, alone. She's going to reach out to the one person she thinks she can still trust. She's going to call her mom. It was a gamble, but it was all they had. For hours they listened to the open line, hearing nothing but the mundane chatter of Layla's unsuspecting mother talking to friends and relatives. Harding was about to call it a night when, just after 11 p.m., the call they were waiting for came through. It was from a blocked number. "Mom?" Layla's voice was a choked, tearful whisper, distorted by a bad connection from a disposable burner phone. "Layla? Oh, baby, where are you? The police were here. They're looking for you. What did you do?" her mother cried. "I can't talk, Mom. I needed to hear your voice," Layla sobbed. "I messed up. I messed everything up. Where are you, honey? Let me help you." "I can't. I have to keep going. I'm so tired. I'm just so tired," Layla's voice cracked. I'm in Tennessee, Memphis. I think I'm going to find a small motel just for a few hours, just to close my eyes for a little bit." It was the slip-up they needed. The call was too short to get a precise trace, but she had given them the city. Memphis. Harding was immediately on the phone with the Memphis Police Department, relaying the information. He gave them Layla's description, her car, and a stark warning. She's a murder suspect. She's exhausted, emotionally volatile, and desperate. Approach with extreme caution. The hunt was back on, narrowed now to a single city. Teams of Memphis patrol officers began a systematic sweep of every cheap motel and roadside inn along the highways ringing the city. It was a needle in a haystack search, but it was a much smaller haystack. Harding felt the familiar adrenaline surge of the chase. He could picture Layla now, pulling into a dimly lit motel parking lot, her face pale in the dashboard lights, looking over her shoulder at every passing car. The confident, controlling woman from the interview room was gone, replaced by a desperate fugitive. The web of lies she had so carefully woven for nearly a decade was unraveling one thread at a time, and now it was closing in around her. The call from the Memphis PD came at 3:45 a.m. They had found her. Layla's Honda Civic was spotted in the parking lot of the Starlight Inn, a seedy no-tell motel off Highway 78. A tactical team had moved in quietly, confirming her room number with the night clerk. She had surrendered without a fight, collapsing into sobs the moment she saw the police at her door. She was exhausted, broken, and her run was over. Harding and another detective took the first flight to Memphis to escort her back. The Layla Vance who sat in the back of the unmarked car on the long drive back to Chicago was a hollowed-out version of the woman Harding had first met. The righteous anger was gone, replaced by a profound, empty despair. She remained silent the entire trip, staring out the window at the passing landscape as if it were a foreign planet. Back in the same sterile, beige interview room where her deception had begun, Layla finally broke. At first she was silent, her gaze fixed on the metal table. But as Harding calmly and methodically laid out the evidence against her, the fingerprint on the knife, the falsified visitor logs, the old assault charge, her co-worker's testimony about her 1-hour absence, her composure crumbled. "You want to know what happened?" she finally whispered, her voice raw. "You have your file. You think you know the story, but you don't know anything." And then it all came pouring out. A torrent of pain, love, and resentment that had been festering for nearly a decade. "I loved him," she began, tears streaming down her face. "Not the way Rebecca did, all sunshine and future plans. I loved the real Mark, the broken, angry, beautiful man that no one else saw. We were together for a year before he even met her. He was my whole world. Then he met Rebecca and he just threw me away. He said she was good for him, that she was the kind of woman you marry. And I was just the kind of woman you have fun with," she continued, her voice gaining a bitter strength. "When Mark was sent to prison, he wrote to her first. He said he'd made a terrible mistake, that he loved her, that Rebecca was just a naive girl who didn't understand him, and Layla, still deeply in love, believed him. She created the Sheila Jones alias, becoming his secret lifeline. I knew about the attack," she admitted, her voice dropping. "He called me from the infirmary, crying. He told me what they did to him. He made me promise not to tell Rebecca, He said she'd leave him, that he needed her to have a clean life to come home to. And I thought it made me special. I was the one he trusted with his deepest, darkest secret. I was the one who knew the real him. For 7 years, she played her part, sending him money, risking smuggling and contraband, and all the while, playing the role of Rebecca's best friend. She listened to Rebecca read Mark's letters aloud, letters filled with promises Layla knew he could never keep. "It was torture," she hissed, "but he promised me. He swore that when he got out, he would end it with her. He said the truth about his injury would be the final nail in the coffin of their marriage. And then we could finally be together." She had engineered the divorce, just as Rebecca had said, pushing her friend to leave the man she wanted for herself. And when the divorce papers were signed, Layla went to Mark's apartment, her heart filled with 7 years of pent-up hope. "I told him we were free," she said, her voice breaking into a sob. "I told him we could finally start our life together. And he laughed at me." Layla looked up at Harding, her eyes filled with a pain so profound it was terrifying. "He told me I was a fool. He said he never loved me. He said I was just convenient, a way to get money and feel like a man while he was locked away. He said that even with what they did to him, he could do better than a desperate substitute teacher." That was the moment she snapped. The 7 years of sacrifice, the betrayal of her best friend, the risks she took, it all curdled into a white-hot, uncontrollable rage. The knife was on the counter where he'd been slicing a lime for his whiskey. "I didn't even think," she whispered. "I just grabbed it. He turned his back on me, still laughing, and I just wanted him to stop laughing." The confession was complete, a tragic and brutal story of obsession and manipulation. Harding felt a sliver of pity for her, but it was quickly extinguished by the cold reality of what she had done. He was about to conclude the interview when she said one last thing, a final, devastating postscript to the whole affair. "The sickest part, detective," she said, a bitter, broken smile on her face. "The night he was laughing at me, he was bragging. He told me his real plan. He was going to take the last of the money I had sent him, the money I thought was for our future." Harding waited. "He was going to California," she finished, her voice a dead whisper. "He'd met someone online, a woman from San Diego. He was going to use my money to disappear and start a new life with her. He wasn't leaving Rebecca for me. He was playing us both, right up until the very end." In that moment, the entire tragedy was laid bare. Mark hadn't been a victim caught between two women. He was the puppeteer, pulling their strings from his prison cell, a master manipulator who had used their love and loyalty as currency. And in the end, his intricate web of deceit had ensnared and destroyed all three of them. The case of Marcus Washington was officially closed. The paperwork was filed, the evidence logged, and Lila Vance was awaiting trial, her confession sealing her fate. But for Detective Harding, the resolution brought no sense of victory, only a profound and lingering sadness. The usual satisfaction of solving a puzzle was absent, replaced by the bitter taste of a tragedy with no heroes, only victims of their own flawed humanity. He sat in his office, the gray Chicago skyline visible through the smudged window, and replayed the story in his mind. It was a perfect, self-contained ecosystem of destruction, fueled by lies. Mark, a man broken by a prejudiced system, had become a predator himself, preying on the emotions of the two women who loved him. He had weaponized their hope, using Rebecca as his clean, respectable anchor to the outside world, and Layla as his secret, all-purpose tool for survival and comfort on the inside. He had demanded loyalty from both while offering none in return. Rebecca had lost 7 years of her life, faithfully waiting for a fantasy. Her reward was a devastating betrayal, not just by the man she loved, but by the woman she had trusted as a sister. She was a victim of a lie so profound it had reshaped her past and poisoned her future. Layla, consumed by an obsession she mistook for love, had sacrificed her morals, her money, and ultimately, her freedom. She had allowed herself to be used, clinging to a promise that was never real. Her final violent act was not the calculated move of a cold-blooded killer, but the desperate, lashing out of a soul that had finally realized it had been hollowed out and discarded. Harding thought of his captain, Miller, who would see the closed case as a simple win. But Harding knew the truth was infinitely more complex. This wasn't just a story about a love triangle gone wrong. It was a story about how the scars of injustice can fester, turning victims into victimizers. It was about how easily love can curdle into obsession, and how that obsession can become a justification for the most monstrous acts of betrayal. Mark's manipulation was born of his own powerlessness in prison. Layla's crime was born of the powerlessness of her unrequited love. A few days later, Rebecca Washington came to the precinct to collect the last of Mark's personal effects: a wallet, a set of keys, the mundane artifacts of a life cut short. She looked different. The raw grief and anger had subsided, replaced by a quiet, steely resolve. "I wanted to thank you, Detective," she said, her voice steady, "for not just accepting the easy answer, for finding the truth, as ugly as it is." "It's my job," Harding replied. "You know," she said, looking out the window, "for the longest time, I thought this story was about me and Mark. Then I thought it was about Layla and Mark. But I was wrong. This was never about love. It was about possession. He thought he owned my loyalty, and she thought she owned his future, and I let my life be defined by a man who wasn't worth a single day of it, let alone 7 years." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "I'm selling my place, moving out of Chicago. I need to go somewhere. I can't see the ghosts." Harding nodded in understanding. He saw it all the time. The survivors of violence weren't just left with loss. They were left with a geography of pain, a city where every street corner could hold a memory they desperately needed to escape. After she left, Harding closed the file on Marcus Washington, its thick stack of reports and photographs a testament to the wreckage. He placed it in the drawer with the other closed cases, other stories of the city's ghosts. The final lesson from this tragedy is not a simple one. It serves as a chilling reminder that the most dangerous prisons are not always the ones with concrete walls and iron bars. They are the prisons we build for ourselves out of obsession and deceit. In a world that can often feel unjust, it's easy to believe that love and loyalty are the ultimate salvation. But when that love is blind and that loyalty is built on a foundation of lies, it doesn't save. It consumes. The story of Mark, Rebecca, and Layla is a testament to the destructive power of a truth withheld. It shows us that the most devastating betrayals often come not from our sworn enemies, but from those who sit beside us, hold our hands, and call us friend. In the end, there were no winners in this story, only the ashes left behind when a web of lies finally goes up in flames.